So we just finished Black Friday, Cyber Monday, that whole deal. And that took a lot of my time. Now that that is over, because it's officially Tuesday, it's Tuesday, November 28th when I'm recording this. Welcome in, by the way. I'm Kyle. This is the Dirt Bike Channel podcast. I think you probably know that. Come here for all things dirt bikes related, and yeah, I'm gonna put out some podcast episodes now. I know I say that every time, but I mean it this time. And here's how you could make sure. We're gonna, when we bring sponsors on this podcast, other than me, make sure to go ahead and patronize those sponsors. Is that the right word? Go to their websites, do their things, because that'll really help. Right now, the way you can help, because I don't have a sponsor for this podcast because I was lazy, is I'm sponsoring the podcast, and you can help me by going to Rocky Mountain ATV. See the link that's down in the description of this podcast, or the link that is over on dirtbikechannel.com right now, dirtbikechannel.com. When you go over there, you can buy a shirt, you can buy tie downs, you can buy anything I've got over there, and that's going to get you entered in to win 2 different motorcycles. I'm going to be talking about the KTM 300XCW line, the 2024s, and I'll also talk a little bit about the 24XCs as well as a result of this, because it's kind of hard for me to talk about the XC without talking about the XCW platform, or vice versa. So you can win. I'm giving both of these freaking bikes away, which is kind of interesting, because the bikes we're talking about today, you can win both of them. Well, you're only going to win one of them, but the grand prize winner has the option of taking the XCW or the XC in the sweepstakes. And then the runner-up is going to get the spoils. This is happening in December, the end of November and December of 2023. So if you're listening to this podcast anytime in that time, when it's still the holidays of 2023, and if you're still in the year of our Lord, AD Anno Domini 2023, go to my website, buy something, and that gets you entered into the drawing. But you could also use my link to Rocky Mountain ATV, which is where I started with this whole thing, is what I was trying to figure out. Go over there, use my link to Rocky Mountain ATV. When you're at dirtbikechannel.com, it says Shop Rocky Mountain ATV. You click on that link, and then you can buy anything they sell, because they're the best in the business, and it will give me a referral bonus, and it also gives you free entries into the sweepstakes. So I don't know why you would buy anything from Rocky Mountain ATV right now in the month of the last part of November and December, all of December of 2023. I don't know why you would do that without going through my link, because it won't cost you anything, and you might actually win a dirt bike. I have given dirt bikes to people who have just used those links. It's absolutely insane. So anyway, you should go do that. I'm going to take a drink here. This is going to be a great podcast. So I am recording this at 3:08 p.m. This is what time it is. And we want to talk about 300 XCWs. We want to talk about XCWs mostly. It's the KTM 2024 lineup, in their 2-stroke lineup. I got looking through the podcast, and the last time I really talked about the KTMs in this podcast was January of this year. And I talked about the TBI motors just in the last podcast. So we talked about that a little bit. But I wanted to talk about kind of more of a review, more of a long-term review of how I feel about the updates to these 2024 KTM XCWs and XC bikes, okay? Because we talked about motors kind of a little bit before, and I've done this on the YouTube channel, but I hadn't done it in a long-form situation where we're talking about just kind of the review of the motorcycles. What I want to talk about, I've got some hits and I've got some misses on here. A lot of this would be similar to what I did in the review. If you watch the review for the 2024 XCW on my YouTube channel. But we're just going to talk about it a little bit more and just go a little bit more long-winded on this for those over-the-road truckers and things that are into dirt bikes. You know who you are. I constantly get more and more people asking me like, hey, I get people asking like, why don't you do more podcast episodes? And so here we go with this one. Let me say that I have been paying attention, pretty close attention to what KTM has been doing for over 10 years now. I bought my first KTM in 2012, and it changed my life. It was a 300 XCW. It's the only reason that any of this Dirt Bike Channel stuff even exists is because of that bike. Because it was just the right bike at the right time for the right person, and I really, really loved it, and kind of changed the trajectory of my life. And so I've watched what KTM has done with their bikes, mostly the 2-stroke bikes, but I've also paid attention to what's happening with the 4-strokes. And they've had a couple of years where a lot of things changed. The first time that a lot of things changed was in the 2017 model year on the 2-strokes, and that was when the motors went counterbalanced. They changed the position of the starter motor. The motors became counterbalanced, so it was a much more smooth motor. At that time, they were still carbureted, but EFI was not far down the road from that point. But they changed the frames that year in 2017. A lot of stuff changed. They changed the forks. They became an air fork, at least on the XCs. That wasn't on the XCWs. But that was a huge, huge monumental change. Everything changed on the bikes, essentially. And then they did that again, where everything changed on the bikes again in the 23 model year for the XCs and the 24 model year for the XCWs, because typically speaking, the XCWs have kind of gotten the new stuff about 1 year later. After like the XCs, it's like the motocross bikes get the stuff, the KTM SX bikes get it, and the XCs usually get it that same year. But then the XCWs, it usually takes like another year, and then those same types of updates, anything that does translate to come to the XCW lineup, will come a year later. So that's kind of what happened, at least in 23 and 24. And I will say that they changed more stuff. I believe that they changed more stuff in the 23 to 24 model year jump than they've ever done ever before. And that's because like so many things changed, like the transmission changed and the motor changed, the way that it's injected. It went to TBI versus TPI. The shock changed, the frame changed, the kickstand changed, the alt finger clickers changed, headlights changed. I mean, there's so many things that changed. And a lot of them are good. Not all of them are good. And so I'm going to be talking about some of the things where I think they did good, and we'll talk also XCW and XC, and then I'm going to talk about some of the things that I don't think helped us in the off-road world of off-road dirt bikes, because that's what I do mostly. Thank you for your patience as I get a drink. Just super parched this afternoon. So the big thing, and it's funny too, because usually when we start talking about things, usually I start with motors, because a lot of times if there's been a change to the motor, sometimes it feels like in a lot of cases, maybe it's because they're motorcycles. The motors usually get the attention. At least I think they do. And I feel like they do a lot of times. But in this case, even though the motor did change a lot in this TBI, which we've done another podcast on, I want to start with the forks, actually. And the reason why I'm starting with the forks is because WP, they're the ones that, make these forks and build the valving and everything, WP. And then KTM may even own WP at this point. It's maybe like a sister company or something. But they did the best job that I've seen on any stock dirt bike ever. And I've had a lot of these motorcycles. I've had like 90 dirt bikes over the years. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's somewhere between 80 and 90 of them that I've had. And that goes KTM, Husqvarna, Yamaha, Honda, Gas, Kawasaki, Sherco, Electric Motion. I've had a lot of different bikes, TM. And so you've had everything from WP to KYB to Showa. What are some of the other? Oh, Sachs I've had before. I'm trying to think of some of the other ones as far as forks and things go. But this KTM fork in 2024, it's the 48 millimeter. They call it the Explorer fork, or it's the Exact fork is what it is. It's a spring fork, and it is the best fork that I have had on any stock dirt bike. The only thing that is better than that I've had has been my cone valve forks, also from WP, that I had custom valved for me by moto experts out of Spanish Fork, Utah. Kevin is the owner over there. He's a good friend of mine, and that's the only fork that I've had that's better. And I'm even talking about revalves. Like, I've had some revalves that were good, and I've had some revalves that weren't as good. But these stock forks on the 2024 KTM XEW bikes for what I'm doing, for the type of like single track enduro mountain riding and even desert riding, those forks are the best valve forks I've ever had. And I keep saying it, and I keep like, it keeps becoming, every time I ride that freaking motorcycle, it is more and more ingrained in me that it is the best thing that I've ever had. Those forks are absolutely incredible, and I have loved them. On the XCW, it's valved, I think, perfectly for me. I'm 180 pounds now. I've gained 20 pounds over the last year and a half, 2 years, because I was lifting weights and stuff. Like, I'm fit. I'm as fit as I've ever been, but I gained 20 pounds of muscle. And so I weigh 180 in my birthday suit. And then obviously I'm wearing a bunch of gear, and I should weigh myself once I get because I'm wearing a lot of times 15-pound packs. Sometimes it's 18 pounds, just my riding pack. And then you got the boots and the helmet and all the other stuff. But I'm able to dial in 110 millimeters of sag on these bikes, or sometimes 105. On these XCWs now in 2024, I definitely have to have at least 110 millimeters of sag in order to make this work. We're going to talk about that in a bit. But those forks are amazing for me. On the XC, they're valved a little bit stiffer, and so they don't work as well in the mountains, in the slower single track. But the XC works freaking fantastic out in the desert. But I mostly want to talk about the XCW forks. It is the best valve fork. Most forks on all of the other motorcycles, whether it's a TM, a Sherco, a Kawasaki, a Honda, a Yamaha, whatever, they're valved too stiff for enduro riding. I'm just going to say that again. All of those manufacturers choose valving from these fork makers, whether it's KYB, and KYB is some of the hardest valve forks that I've ever had. And I'm sure they work great on a moto track. I only ride moto just a little bit. And I'm sure, some of these bikes, in fact, like the Honda CRF 250 RX, I took on the track several times, and it was actually really good there. And I think a YZ250FX would be great on the track. Even if I was going to get a motorbike, I'd probably want a YZ250F. I would. That's the bike that I would want for the track. And I think that their valving is probably super great for those things. But they always then try to just translate this motocross valving over, and they maybe soften it up, maybe just a teeny bit for these enduro or / cross country bikes. Because even the Yamaha brands don't really make an enduro bike. They make a cross country bike like a YZ250FX or a KT or the Honda CRF 250 RX or the Kawasaki KX250X. Those bikes, they just have their standard motocross valving, and they soften them up just a teeny bit, and then they say, hey, look, here's your new enduro bike or whatever, and they're just not that great valved. The WP fork, this exact fork, is just better. It's softer throughout the range. It's softer in the initial stroke. It progressively gets more and more hold up to it, so I don't think you're blowing through the stroke. Like, that was probably a big complaint that a lot of people had prior to, especially with the WP open cartridge 48 millimeter Explorer fork is what it was called. People would blow through it if they weighed very much, and they didn't. It was good, but it's just that open cartridge. There wasn't as much stuff as they could do with it. With this closed cartridge fork, there's much more they can do with it. And so yeah, it is the best fork that I've ever had on any stock dirt bike. And the other one that I felt really, really strongly about was a 2019 Beta 390 RR, and it was a Sachs fork. And I loved that thing. But yeah, so the KTM 300 XCW with that spring cartridge exact fork, it's got the best forks in the industry as far from a stock fork, and I think that's amazing. That's an amazing hit. So great job for the XCW in 2024 on that. We've talked about the motors before, but that TBI motor, it runs amazing. And on the XCW, they made the motor a little bit softer. It's mapped with a softer hitting map. It isn't like a fire-breathing dragon. It has plenty of power, but it's not a fire-breathing dragon. Whereas the XC bike is mapped hotter, and that is a fire-breathing dragon motor. And it lights up that rear tire, and it just is in your face. I took my 300 XC to the track with my son 6 weeks ago or so, and it was amazing. It was so much fun to ride on a moto track. That was a ton of fun. And so I mean, the TBI motors are absolutely incredible. One of the things I like about them is essentially I haven't tuned them at all with the TPI bikes. So in the 2023 XCW, you had a TPI transfer port injection, and Some of them ran really good out of the gate, and some of them didn't run quite as good, but I felt like I needed to kind of do a little bit of tuning on every single one of those motors. And I would start by putting putting the actual, idle screw in the bike, and then doing the whole air bypass adjustment on the side of the throttle body there. And then I would oftentimes still have to kind of mess with my power valve on the side of the motor. Now with the TBI motors, it's an electronic power valve. It just runs amazing. They run like crazy. And so on the XCW line, they've softened the map, and I think it's to give more traction. We're going to talk about traction here in a bit because that's my biggest problem. But yeah, so they've got a softer map on the XCW, and I think that it's good. And it's before, I didn't think that, like in the olden days, like in 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 20, I didn't think that the XCs and the XCWs were mapped really any differently. They might have said that they were mapped differently with different ignition mapping, but I couldn't really feel any difference when I would ride the bikes. And so it wasn't really a talking point, but now it is. And I think part of the reason why is because the TBI bike runs so freaking good and it makes so much power, the TBI motor, that it just made more sense on the enduro bike to kind of soften it a little bit. And so it's an incredible motor. And the W's are going to have a little bit softer mapping, whereas the XC bikes, they're going to be super aggressive. So some of the other things that I think are hits are oil injection. So, and this is on the XCW, they are oil injected. On the XC, they're not oil injected. So that removes one failure point with that oil pump, but it requires you then to mix the oil into your fuel if you've got an XC bike. And here's why I think that is a hit. I think it's a hit because it's kind of your two-stroke world is kind of divided into a couple of camps. There are some people that have avoided two-strokes. One of the reasons they've avoided two-strokes is because they don't want to mix gas. They don't want to mix oil in the fuel. They just want to be able to go to a gas station, put gas in the bike, and go. Now, I understand some of you guys are laughing when I say that because you're like, it's not hard to mix oil and fuel. And while I agree with you, we still have to acknowledge the fact that there is a huge part of the dirt bike riding contingent that thinks it's just great that the bike is going to mix the oil in the fuel for you and it's got oil injection. Then there's this other camp that is so appalled by that, and they're like purists, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is ruining two-strokes because what happens if that oil pump goes out? Then my motor's going to burn down. I don't want that failure point. And so there are two contingents, and if you just have oil injection across the board, then you alienate all those people. You're going to alienate people either way. So the fact that KTM now has oil injection on one model and premix on the other model with the same freaking motor, this TBI motor, I think that's a major win for them. I think it's super awesome because it's giving the consumer essentially more choices and what they want to do, okay? So I think that's super great. And I think they're smart to have done it that way. Beta, if you buy a Beta motorcycle right now, you get oil injection. Actually, on the race edition, it's premix. So on the Betas, it's a similar deal where you're getting you get a premix version or an oil injected version, and KTM did a similar thing. On the Shercos, at least currently, they're not oil injected or fuel injected. So the Sherco is a simple deal, but on your TMs, it's oil injected. So the TM is basically like a TBI motor, but it's oil injected on all of their bikes. Whereas KTM, at least I think it is. I could be wrong on that. With KTM, they're giving you the option. Here's another thing that I think is a hit, and it's the PDS suspension on the back, on the rear shock of the XCW bikes. I don't know if sometimes I have to remind myself this. The PDS PDS means there's no linkage. PDS means that the shock mounts on the top of the swing arm on the back, of your motorcycle on that swing arm there. Most, like all the motocross bikes, have a linkage where that shock goes kind of down, and it hooks kind of down in front of the rear tire. And so it changes, the frame and the geometry and all these different things, but they're doing that to try to get better adjustability and maybe a longer stroke, or I don't even know what the exact reasons are, but almost every bike has linkage, and I think it's for doing big jumps and things like that. It works really well at super high speeds, and it works really good on big jumps and things. It gives you a lot of adjustability, but it also gives like another thing that the bikes can hang up on in the off-road world. So it gives you something that they're sitting there, this thing that's hanging down, that's the first thing to hit a rock or a root, or when you drop off of a ledge, it's going to go bam and slam down on that thing. And it's not good for that piece of equipment, that linkage down there. It's hard on that. So you're always having to, if you're going to ride any of these bikes that have linkage, which almost all of them do, if you're going to ride them off road and the rocks and the roots and nasty stuff, you're going to have some sort of a guard. The best things that we have right now are these big skid plates made by SXS. And it's this slide plate that essentially is made out of, a high strength plastic or whatever. And it just makes it kind of one smooth motion for the bike to be on a rock or a tree on the frame and then slide all the way off over that linkage. But with PDS, the shock is mounting to the top of the swing arm and you don't have that problem. And for like enduro riding and single track riding, I do prefer the PDS, and there's not that many bikes that have it. It's really only in the KTM lineup, and it's just in the XCW. I mean, the say like the 85 SX and the 65 SXs, they technically are a PDS as well. But once we get into the full size bikes, it's just now the 150 XCW. I'm doing this off the top of my head. The 250 XCW and the 300 XCW. I don't know if the 450 XCW, I can't even remember what they have or if they even have that bike for this year. On the 4-strokes, it gets a little bit dicey for me. But this PDS is only happening on a couple of these models. In the Gas line and in the Husky line, the Husqvarna line, it's linkage on everything. And so there's really only, off the top of my head, the only ones that I can think of that are currently in production are the 150 XCW, the 250 XCW, and the 300 XCW. Those are the only three models that you can get the PDS style suspension in. Every other bike out there has linkage. I'm so glad that they kept the PDS. I hope that they continue to keep it, because I think it's a good thing. I really like having it, and I prefer PDS for my enduro bike, my enduro off-road bike. I'd prefer it to be PDS over the linkage. I can't tell the difference. Once they're set up properly and they have the same, the right sag and things, I can't tell the difference. So that PDS, I think, is a really big win. And then again, the consumer has choices. If they want a linkage bike in the KTM lineup, they just do the XC, or they can do the Husqvarna TE 250 or the TE 300. If they still want the enduro bike, they have the Husky line or the Gas line if they wanted to go with a linkage. So it's almost, you can literally just kind of do whatever you want in the KTM line, because if the orange bike doesn't have, has something that, or there's something on the orange bike that you don't want or whatever, you can move over to the freaking Husky line, Husqvarna, or the Gas line and get that thing that you want. So I love that. It's also cool that they do finger clickers all the way around. So here in 2024, you have finger clickers for a lot of times we've had finger clickers for rebound and compression on the front forks. But WP is the only one that does that. And I don't know why, but they are. They're the only ones that do finger clickers. But now you have finger clickers even on your rear shock. So you have finger clickers on the compression for the high-speed compression and the low-speed compression on the rear shock, which is like in the first in the industry. I don't know that that's ever been done before. And you have finger clickers for the rebound on the shock, which is also like unheard of. So the fact that you have finger clickers for every single adjustment on your shock and your forks in the 2024 XCW is unbelievable to me. I can't remember. I got to go out and look at my XC if the rebound is finger clickable on the XC. Dang it, that's now I'm curious, because I know on the 24 XC, if there is one thing that's not finger clickable, it would be the rebound of the shock. And man, as soon as I go outside, as soon as I'm done with this podcast, maybe I'll actually pause this right now and run out there and look. I'm going to do that. Hold please. Okay, I'm back. Can I tell you how much I love the fact that I can just run outside and look at that? So I did confirm that there are finger clickers on. First I went out there and I'm like, oh, look, there's no finger clicker on the XC. And then I realized it was because I had my cone valve and my Trax shock on there. I'm like, oh my gosh, this isn't the stock suspension. So I went over and looked in the box and I'm like, yes, it is a finger clicker on the XC all the way around, even on that rebound. It's funny too, because when I was in Italy and I was talking with the WP reps, I was at the Gas International, like Enduro, like they had a little festival thing for their 2024 model year. And I asked them why finger clickers on everything except for the premium components. They said that the reason why you've got no finger clickers on these premium components is for racing. You don't, like if you're a race team or whatever, you don't want to have somebody easily be able to just change your suspension setting. So they could, like, somebody could just reach over, just super quick and just like do a couple clicks on your suspension and you might not know. And they're like, it maybe won't happen as easy if somebody has to go over there with a screwdriver, which I'm like, okay, that's the best explanation I've ever heard for why some of these bikes most suspension components haven't had finger clickers, is so that somebody doesn't click it too easily. I still think it's dumb. I'm like, so you're telling me that racers are going to just like come over here and just go like change your suspension settings for you, like on the line, like a starting line or whatever, in like an enduro race? And they're like, yeah, maybe. And I'm like, oh, geez, that's insane. But that's what they said. Okay. So finger clickers, you've got it all the way around on the 2023 XC and the 24 XC and XCWs, and I think that's great. They also updated the kickstand. The kickstands, we always had a problem with these little bolts that would come out of the kickstand. The bolt that would hold in the spring on the kickstand, those would constantly come out over the years. And over the 10 years that preceded this model that I was paying attention, it was super annoying, because you would have, like, if you weren't checking that little screw, it was a little torque screw in the kickstand. If you weren't checking that all the time, it would work its way loose, and then your spring would come off, and you would have to like drill the thing out, because once it was in aluminum. So the kickstand was aluminum, and it was a teeny little screw. And so once the screw got loose, it would would kind of break away and kind of round out the hole or whatever. And it was just a dumb thing. And they updated that. So the kickstand got an update. It is harder to get to because the kickstand sits in more. It fits tucked into the bike more. And I have a harder time using my boot to kick it down. So that has been an adjustment that I've had to get rid of or get used to, is it's not as easy for me to deploy the kickstand because it fits into the bike tighter. It doesn't stick out as much. So I have to be much more deliberate with my boot, my left heel, to get my boot in there and get that to go down. But overall, the kickstand is a better design than it used to be, for sure. Other things that I think are super great is they finally put a headlight on the bike that is actually serviceable. So it's an LED headlight on the XCW bikes, and it is it's awesome. Like, you can actually use it. I use when I do ride at night, if I'm purposely going to go ride at night, I use an Oxbow helmet light. It's basically this little light, an LED light that clips into the top of my helmet on like a GoPro style mount. And then there's a little battery pack that goes in my backpack, and that is so freaking bright. It's amazing. And when you pair that with this new headlight, it's just awesome. It's awesome. I used to put on like aftermarket headlights on a lot of these bikes, and I don't really feel like I need to put an aftermarket headlight on them now. I know you can do brighter ones, and even the Cherubies VSL headlight, which I've used for a long time on a lot of these bikes, it's the Cherubies VSL LED headlight. It may be brighter. I haven't actually tested to see if it's brighter than what the stock headlight is, but the stock headlight is good enough, I think, for most purposes. And if I'm going to do a night ride on purpose, I'm going to want to take one of those Oxbow helmet lights, because it's brighter than any of the headlights I've ever seen, and it moves with my head. And so I kind of want both. Best of both worlds is a headlight on the bike and a headlight on my head that moves with my head. Let's talk about brakes and the clutch for just a little bit. On the KTM bikes, they're using the Brembo brakes, or the Brembo master cylinder on the clutch and the brake. And I think they're the best in the industry. And I've had a lot of these bikes. I've had, Nissan brakes and master cylinders and clutches. And Nissan they're fine. Like, they come on all of your Japanese bikes, and they come on your Betas. At least they do the brake on the Beta. They do a Brembo I don't know why I'm laughing, but they do a Brembo clutch, but they do a Nissan brake, so they mix. And some of these manufacturers have done, I think I had another one recently. It might've been what was it? Was it the TM recently that had a mix? No. The TM had like a Brembo. It had a Brembo brake and clutch on the front, but then they brake, front brake, a Brembo, and then they did a Nissan brake on the rear, which I think is interesting. But anywho, on the KTMs, you get the Brembos, and they don't. I was asking one of the KTM guys, one of the corporate KTM guys at one of these events I was at earlier this year. I'm like, why don't they put Brembos on the Huskies and the gases? And every once in a while I'll hear about, because it's historically the Huskies got like it was called the Magura. Now the Huskies and the gases most of the time get a brake tech front brake and clutch, the master cylinders up in your hands. And I asked why, and some people will say like, oh look, I've got this Husky and it's got a Brembo, but essentially it's this. They don't, like, Brembo can't supply the KTM groups, like KTM and Husqvarna and Gas with enough of these components to put them on all of the bikes. And so they prioritize the Brembo stuff over to the KTM. And so they put all of the Brembo things on the KTM. And if there is anything left over, it trickles sometimes, very rarely, down to like the Husky. I don't think it ever goes to the gas. Because I think it's a little bit more expensive component for them too, and so they charge more for the Husky, so they'd put it on the Husky, but they don't put it on the gas because the gas is a teeny bit cheaper product at the end for the end consumer. Anyway, the point is the Brembos come on the KTMs, and you're never going to be guaranteed to get a Brembo on the Husky or the gas. Most 99% of the time, you're going to get a brake tech, and I don't like them as much. I just don't. Like, on the clutch is fine on the brake tech, but I don't like the brake tech front brake as much. On the rears, I can't tell a difference whether it's Brembo or brake tech or Nissan. I cannot tell the difference on the rears. I just don't have enough dexterity because I'm using my entire leg essentially. Obviously, you're using your ankle a little bit, but oftentimes you're using a significant portion of your body, and I just don't have the dexterity in my foot / ankle / leg to tell the difference. But I do on my finger. We have more dexterity and more like control of our index finger than just about any other place in our body. And so I can tell that I have a better feel, a more powerful brake feel on that front brake on the Brembo than I do with any of these other bikes. And the KTM has that. And it's one of the reasons why I like the orange bikes over the Huskies and the gases. There are several reasons why I personally like the KTMs, and that's over the Husky and the gas in, this essentially big group of motorcycles that they make. And the brake is one of them. That front brake is big to me. 75 to 80% of the stopping power comes from the front brake, and I want to be confident with that. Now, I did have a couple that had to be bled here recently, and which is totally new. Like, I had never had to bleed a Brembo front brake when it was brand new, but I've had a couple of them where I've had to. On this last hard enduro bike, I haven't needed to do that, but I have needed to do it in the past on some of these. The two other ones that I had before it, I did have to bleed them, which was interesting. Here's another thing that is great about still on the XCW bike in 24, but not so great on the XC bike, and that is the stator. So the stator is the thing, it's like the thing that's charging. It's kind of like the alternator in the car, right? The stator is giving power for the bike to run. It's giving power for the electronic components, for the spark plug, for the fuel pumps, for all that stuff. And the stator on the XCW is great because it still puts out a tremendous amount of wattage, and so you can run just about anything you want. That headlight, you can install a radiator fan, you can install... It's got plenty of wattage to run anything that a normal dirt biker would run, even if you had like a GPS, one of those, my mind just went blank, Trail Tech GPSs or whatever. It'll power a lot of stuff. You could power a cell phone, charge a cell phone. You could do whatever you want, really. On the XC bike, however, it blows. They really missed on this one. So the stator on the XC bike now is the same stator as what is on the motocross bike, and they don't think you're going to run anything on a motocross bike other than the freaking fuel pump. and the ECU, it doesn't have enough power to run hardly anything else. Like if you put a fan, like one of these fans on these XC bikes, you can run the freaking thing dead. I haven't personally run it dead because I do have a radiator fan on my XC bike, but I'm not riding it a ton. I haven't been in hard enduro situations where the stator, where that fan is running constantly. But I've heard of other people that have run their batteries dead and then can't start the bike just because they were running one of these components. And so you definitely can't run a headlight and the fan at the same time. Definitely not. You could probably run a headlight if it wasn't a large draw on that. But so the stator is wrong, and you can get them rewound. There's a company called Ricky Stator that can rewire that stator on your XC to make it put out more wattage and stuff, but it's just dumb. Why do that? Give us the XC and the XCW should have the same stator in my mind, but they don't in 2024. And so that's just kind of a miss. You'll note, and I'm going to move now into a lot of the misses that I think that are really not helping us in the off-road world. And that's where this whole, the frame, well, before I do that, because the frame, there's a few things with the frame. So the frame is stiffer, but the first thing I want to talk about is they made with the frame, it's now basically the same frame as what the motocross bike has, and the turning radius on it is not good. It isn't as good as it used to be. What does that mean? It just means that the handlebars can't turn as tight as they used to because the frame has changed. And that means that it's just harder in like tight single track situations, especially like on switchbacks and things like that. It's just really hard to get the bike to really turn around a really tight corner. Very, very hard. Harder than it used to be. And it was one of my favorite things about these XCW bikes and the XC bikes through, especially after about, 2017, they turned really tight. And there was no bike in the industry that turned tighter than like a 2020 KTM 300 XCW. That just didn't. Nothing turned tighter than that. Now that turning radius isn't as good of a selling feature. It's still not there are still bikes that have bigger turning radiuses, but it isn't as nice. And I wish that we had the option for a tighter turning radius, but the way that the frame is now and the way that lower triple clamp is, because I think that's the thing that comes over and bumps into the frame stop. I think it's on the bottom of the triple clamp, if I'm not mistaken. It just makes it so the bike doesn't turn as tight, and that sucks. Another thing about the frame is it's just a very much stiffer frame overall. Again, I think all these changes basically trickle their way down from motocross in like racing situations where they're racing supercross and motocross and whatever in GPs over in Europe. And a ton of that stuff has made these bikes way better. So the racing influence over the years has driven so much really cool innovation. But in this case, the frame getting stiffer isn't really helping us in the off-road. So now we're trying to like scramble and trying to find different valving things for and it's mostly the shock that I have the problem with. But the frame being stiff has just kind of thrown a lot of other things off. The bike is also not as nimble as they used to be. The XCW and the XC, they're just not as nimble. I think they're more stable in a straight line, which is kind of weird because like on the XC, and I've said it before, the XCW specifically, the XCW, it's almost like they have certain parts of it where it's made to go slow, but other parts of it's made to go fast. And it's like the front forks on the XCW feel like it's made to go slow, but the frame, or slower anyway, the frame and especially the rear, the valving on the rear shock makes it feel like it's wanting to go fast. And they feel bigger and heavier and not as nimble as they used to. I know they're not bigger and heavier. I don't think they really are. I weighed them. They're within a pound or two of what the old bikes were. And they might even be right there. I'd have to pull it up on my website. In fact, let me do that right now as I'm chatting here, because I think I put them up on my website. If you go to dirtbikechannel.com, I try to take, dirt bike weight comparison. Yeah, so the 2024 300 XCW weighed with full of fuel and no aftermarket components was 245 pounds. And let's see, do I have an XC? Where's the other XCW? I went for a minute without doing it. Okay, so the 2021 300 XCW, which would be the closest comparison that I have to it, was 241. So it got 4 pounds heavier. The bike got 4 pounds heavier from like one iteration to the next. Do I have the XC? Where's the XC? The 24 XC is 242, so it's 2.5 pounds lighter than the XCW, which is crazy. But it doesn't have as many components on it. And then the next time I do an XC 240. Yeah, so I'm looking at this and I'm saying they got about 2.5 pounds heavier in this new generation. So the new generation is 2.5 pounds heavier. It's very, very difficult to feel 2.5 pounds when you're riding the bikes. So I don't think I'm feeling that weight. I'm just feeling the difference in the geometry in the frame, and they just feel bigger. They feel not as nimble. They feel long and wide and harder to turn, which is good if you're if you're trying to navigate through, fast desert stuff or whatever. So the XC is great. The XC is probably the most stable XC that I've ridden. But then if you're going to go slower in first and second gear, it's just a little bit harder. It just feels like it's a little harder to get these things to turn, and to get them to kind of lay over. These are not like reasons not to buy the bike. I'm just like nitpicking because I've been doing this for so long. And then the biggest problem that I've had, and this all relates, I think, to the frame and the new swing arm, is just not as much rear traction. It seems to me like what they tried to do in the 23 XC, which is also the 24 XC because it didn't change really from 23 to 24, and also the 24 XCW, is it feels like they just biased everything so much more to the front wheel. It just feels like there's more pressure on that front wheel. There's more weight on the front wheel. It's just biased more to the front of the motorcycle. And what that has translated to me and to my riding buddies is just not as much rear traction. There are times that I feel like, what in the heck is happening? How come I can't climb this hill? How come my tire is spinning like this? Why is this so hard? And it's been on the slower hill climbs where traction is an incredible premium, especially if I'm off camber, and it's just kind of one of those, like in the nasty stuff. This bike has gotten harder for me to ride. The 24 XCW has gotten harder for me to ride in the nastier stuff, and it's made me shy away from it this year. I haven't wanted to do the nastier stuff and the slower, more technical stuff because I don't think the bike is, I think it's worse in that. I'd rather have a 23 XCW or a 22 XCW if I'm going to go do hard enduro stuff, at least at this point, like with knowing what I know. And so what we're doing is we're setting more sag on the bike to try to get more traction, and then we're speeding up the rebound. But even that, I still don't have as much rear traction on the rear wheel as I used to. And that's a big miss. And I hope that we can kind of get that sorted out in the future. I don't know if they need to go back to more of a progressive spring instead of like a straight rate spring rate. I don't have a ton of information on this stuff, but like on your rear springs, from what I've been told in the past several years, the XCW had a progressive spring rate on the back, which I think meant that as it got stiffer as the spring was compressed more, like the beginning part of the spring being compressed was easier for it to happen, I think. I don't know for sure. And then it progressively got harder, but that's typically what springs do anyway. So I'm not an expert on this. I've just heard that they used to be a quote progressive spring, and then they went to a straight spring rate. And the combination of that with maybe the combination of the fact that it's a new swing arm and it's a combination of just the frame being more stiff and more biased to the front end and all of that stuff really just comes down to I don't get as good a rear end traction with the sucker. And it's my biggest complaint with the bike. I've got it. It's better than it was when I first started riding it, but it's my biggest complaint. I also feel like my hands and my feet are closer together than they have been in the past. I noticed it immediately when I got on the first 23 XC bike that I had a year and a half, maybe it was more than a year ago. I was like, what the heck? It felt more like the Japanese bikes. Whereas I felt like I used to be able to just, spread out in the cockpit before, and it was easier for me to stand up on the bikes. Now I feel like it's more like the Japanese bikes, more like the Sherco, more like the TM, more like the Beta, where I feel like I'm a little bit more hunched over, a little bit more crouched on the bike, which I don't love. And maybe it's great for moto. I don't know, but I don't feel like it's helped. At least it doesn't feel like it's helped me. So, I mean, if I could have everything, I would have the TBI motor in the older frame. I'm just straight up. That's what I would love. Another thing I don't love is the front fender. They went with these like kind of weird wings on the front fender. You've seen them. If you look on the back, it's not on the underside of the front fender, like down right in front of the radiators. They've got these little wing things, you know. All it does is, well, from my standpoint, it just makes it more annoying and harder to wash the bike because you got these weird little fin things sticking out there. And the front fender is super wide. I don't really care that it's wide on the top. I just don't like those fins. The radiator shrouds are freaking ugly. The radiator shrouds, they come out further. They come more further forward. And they say it's so that people don't hook their boots on the bike, but it just makes the bike look more ugly. And then another thing they did, which totally blows, and I'm calling KTM out on this, is they did some proprietary thing to their plastics, like it's patented something, and it has made it basically impossible for aftermarket companies to make plastic for the freaking thing. And so it's really hard to get aftermarket plastic on these bikes because the companies think they're going to get sued, like a Cherbys and what's that other one? Why am I drawing a blank? You guys know who I'm talking about. Oh my gosh, this is the problem with sometimes not preparing notes, but the aftermarket companies of these plastics, they can't make plastics for the 23XCs and the 24XCs and the 24XCWs, specifically not that front shroud, because KTM's got some patent thing on it that precludes these other companies from making it. And I think it's so dumb. That is so dumb. That is actually hurting the industry. You guys are doing it to try to, I don't know, make sure people buy the OEM from you. But if people want to buy the OEM, they're going to do it. Forcing them to do that and making it so these aftermarket companies can't, that's just hurting the industry. One of the things that makes it awesome about our industry is you can buy plastic kits for these bikes for like $100. The graphics kits are always more than the plastic, but it's cool because when you crash or whatever, it's not the end of the world. Because if you tear plastics off your bike, you break a fender, you break a radiator shroud, it's not a real big deal. You can buy the entire plastic kit for $120, you know, especially these aftermarket ones. But you are making it so they can, Cycra, that's the other one that does it. My gosh, that was bugging me so bad. So you've got a Cherbys and Cycra that are these big aftermarket plastic companies, and you've made it so they can't do that. KTM, give that up. That's BS. Stop doing that. Do whatever you have to do to figure that part out so these aftermarket companies can still, because when we start fighting against each other in this way, we're not, a high tide raises all ships and a low tide lowers all ships. And you guys making it so that no one can make an aftermarket plastic for your freaking 24 KTMs, 23 and 24 KTMs, that's BS, KTM. And y'all should be ashamed of yourselves. I understand you want to make profits, blah, blah, blah. You guys make the bikes. You're making a shiz ton of parts for these bikes. And you make really incredible motorcycles. I know I've been nagging on some of these things here, and this is just my opinion. Maybe all this stuff, other riders may have other opinions, but let me give you something. 100 people out of 100 out of 100 of your customers are pissed off that they can't get plastics from Cycra or a Cherbys. You know, so maybe not everyone agrees with what I've said about turning radius and stiffer frame and not a stem and the front fender design, all this other stuff. But I can guarantee you this, KTM, all of your customers are hurt by the fact that you are making them buy OEM plastics for these bikes. That's not a good look on you. It just isn't, KTM. And, you know, if that pisses you off and you don't invite me to another event or whatever, so be it. But I have to speak my mind. That's Bush League, and you should stop doing that. Allow these other companies to make plastics for your bikes. Are you gonna make it? Are you gonna make it so you're gonna put some sort of a patent thing on the foot pegs so no one can make foot pegs? Or are you gonna put a patent on the handlebars so no one can make handlebars? You know, it's just, that isn't how this industry has worked for the entire time of its, you know, lifespan. So don't change it now. That's Bush League. Don't do it. Another miss that I think is the fuel pickup spot. So this is a double-edged sword here. So they wanted to improve the fuel. The fuel petcock typically was in the last few years was on the left side of the fuel tank on the bottom, and the petcock was right there. It could get knocked off. Like if you tipped it over, hit it into a tree or a rock or whatever, that thing could get wiped off. and it was a plastic piece. And a lot of aftermarket companies were making these like billet aluminum pieces that maybe were a little bit stronger, and so we would put those on some of the bikes. But KTM they changed this. So then the fuel pickup spot was in the middle of the tank. So it's completely covered by, it's not accessible. You can't hit it and break it off, essentially, which is cool. The problem is it's this fuel pickup spot that isn't at the lowest point of the tank. And so you can literally run that part dry and run out of fuel while you still have fuel on the bike, or fuel in the gas tank, and it has to splash up in there, which in most riding conditions, it probably can kind of just splash up and get into this like pickup area in the middle of the tank, kind of right below where you're sitting. But there are these wings, specifically a wing on the left-hand side of the tank that drops down lower, which carries another few, a quart, I don't even know, several cups. Let's just say at least a half of a liter that is down there. And that's, if you're at the end of your ride and you're just on like some gravel road or something, and you're trying to get back to the truck and you've got a few miles, several 10 miles, I've heard of people having to stop. Their bike starts to die and they have to stop and kind of like tip the bike over so that fuel will flow up into that pickup bowl in the middle of there. And so it's a double-edged sword, because they wanted to make it, I think, so it was less prone to be able to breaking that fuel petcock off or whatever. I mean, fuel pickup, it wasn't a petcock. On the fuel injector bikes, there was no petcock where you could turn the fuel off or whatever. It was just like this, where the fuel came out of the tank. They wanted to, make that into a more protected area, which they did. But now it creates this other problem, which your fuel pickup spot isn't at the bottom of the tank. So I feel like what if they ran some little hose? I know my buddy Tyler tried to do that, where he was going to run, he got inside the tank and he tried to run like a little hose that went over and down into that left low point of the tank, and I can't remember what he said his issues were with doing that, but I feel like KTM could figure that out. So they could have the fuel pickup spot, or have the pump and all that stuff, and have the, like, where the fuel comes out, it could be in that higher spot, but still allow, let's get some way so that fuel can be used, in that lowest part of the tank. We don't want to run out of fuel in the bike when we still have fuel in the bike, if that makes any sense. So those are some of my thoughts as far as the hits and misses of these 2024 KTMs, and also a little bit of the Huskies and the gas gases. Just wanted to kind of mention again, I do have that sweepstakes going. So if you go to my website, dirtbikechannel.com, here in the later part of November, we've still got a couple days in November, and then all of December here in 2023, you can get entered to win. I've got the 24 KTM 300 XCW Hard Enduro. It's the special edition bike. It's a sick bike. It is up for grabs, and also my 2024 KTM 300 XC. So both of the bikes that we've been talking about here, they are both going to new homes. And the way that you do that is you go to my website and you either buy something off my site, like a hat or a shirt or tie downs or a toe strap or a wash brush or whatever I've got up there. That gets you entered in. You can also use my links to Rocky Mountain ATV. So if you click on the link, you go to dirtbikechannel.com, there's a menu item that says Shop Rocky Mountain ATV. Boom, you click on that link, and then you can buy anything Rocky Mountain ATV sells, and it gets you entered into the drawing for these two motorcycles. It won't cost you a dime if you do it that way. So yeah, let's go ahead and get you guys entered for these bikes. They're pretty amazing motorcycles. We just talked for quite a while about how good they are, and then maybe some of the things that I think could be improved in the future. So thank you so much for all of you guys out there. If you've ever supported me, if you've used those links, if you've bought something from me, you're the reason why this still exists. And it's been an amazing run to be able to support my family. And even now that I'm a single dad and I'm supporting, two households and things like that, it's more important than ever, because money is tighter than ever. Expenses are high. I know expenses are high for everybody everywhere, and I'm just trying to make this continue to work. I love this. I love the industry. I love some of the people that I've met over the years in our industry, and I just want to keep doing this as long as I possibly can. And anytime that you're using those links or doing those things, it really, really helps. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I hope everybody has a fantastic holiday season. I should have some more podcasts coming out very, very soon. But if you don't hear me in between now and Christmas and New Year's, much love, and leave a single track. Thanks.